Hi, and welcome back to TubaPeopleTV, where it's all things Arnold Jacobs, all the time. I'm here with Ed Kuhn, former principal trumpet of the Savannah Symphony and the Charleston Symphony Orchestras. Are you having a good time here in Macomb?
I'm having a great time here in Macomb.
Ed, I was wondering, when did you first start studying with Mr. Jacobs?
When did I first start? It was when I was, I believe it was right after I'd completed my studies at Northwestern. So it probably went in 83, 84-ish.
So you'd been studying with Mr. Chickowitz prior to that?
That's true. I'd started with Mr. Chickowitz, and before that, Will Scarlett, and I played in Civic and studied with Mr. Herseth for a while.
What brought you to Jacobs?
I kind of came to him maybe last. I kind of had developed this sort of problem or complex where initially I would get ready to attack and start to play something, and if I wasn't playing in a group just by myself, I'd almost walk up. I couldn't. Everybody would laugh at me and make fun of me. Get ready to make an attack and just, have this hesitation and then get it out. And I'd worked, I'd gone to Chickwitz with the problem and Scarlett and various people. And they didn't really have any good solution. It was, those things like that are kind of in your head, not really in your mechanics. And so I went to Mr. Jacobs, and he was very relaxed about it. This will take maybe 2 or 3 lessons, And he was right. He had a real skill in I'm sure he could diagnose it immediately. He's probably seen it 30,000 times, and he had a real skill in, of course, what to do to solve any sort of problem. But which is initially what I thought I was going there for him to do. But really what he ended up doing was just teaching me to become a much better player, much better musician, and he had such a skill at knowing all of his different tricks, and you breathe into the machines. He'd draw the pictures of the little T and the big A and the 2, the short line and the long line, all these different teaching methods that he'd been doing for 50 years with probably 75 or 100 different people. And I'm sure he was very analytical, but he would get you thinking so simply and about the product that you wanted to achieve. It would kind of free you of any of those other problems you'd had, and kind of make you really the best player that you could become, and then get to the next step, which I'm sure that we all should try to achieve as musicians, being really an artist and getting beyond your instrument and just making music and freeing you up to do that. So, to answer your question, initially what he did was just get me to focus on the vocal aspect of producing the sound rather than the It just became, he would draw the pictures of the little T, the big A, you want the vowel sound there, and then we just do very simple exercises over and over again to establish really, again, any Jacobs students have heard this many times, you can't break a bad habit, you have to establish a new one. Mm-hmm. And over the course of a month or so and several lessons, we did that, and again, the teaching that he did for me anyway was really teaching you how to think, teaching you how to play your instrument, but the instrument that he was focused on with me was the one between my ears, not the one in my hands. At that point, I'd had so many great teachers and had learned a lot about how to play the instrument. He taught me how to think about how to play the instrument. In retrospect, I didn't feel that way then. Looking back on it, which is what I think really truly great teachers can do, is they teach people how to think. So, he had all of his different. And so in that way, he could teach, I'm sure, any brass player with equal ease, and probably any wind player. He had such a reputation, of this sort of witch doctor with all these machines you were blowing into, and doing so many different kind of gimmicks. People looked at him at gimmicks at that time, blowing to this and think this way, or sometimes he'd have people doing exercises while they were playing, or any number of different things. Well, what he was, and so people remember those things. But he was just, looking back at it now through the eyes of a old senile man.
Talking about me again.
Yes, I really think what he was doing was almost using those things as a distraction and a way to diagnose things. Mm-hmm. He was looking at it maybe very analytically, but he was, as again any Jacobs student would say, he wants you to have the mind of the child. Mm-hmm. Paralysis by analysis. You don't want that. So, I wasn't really being analytical. The only thing I would become analytical about was making the phrase, being the artist. We'd spend a lot of time about how you want to do this and this and this. Well, he'd use those tricks, which weren't really tricks. He was trying to focus your mind on something else and forget about the stuff that was getting in the way. but you'd see them as tricks to get to that point, and then you really were learning music. Your instrument was between your ears. He'd teach you to be more efficient on the instrument that was on your face, but his really skill as a teacher, again, I think, was working on that instrument between your ears.
So his was so for you, for your initial sessions with him, you were attracted to him to try and solve this hesitation problem in starting notes.
Right, that was the reason I originally went to him. Of course, he had such a reputation. I felt lucky to get to study with him at all, but that was the problem. I went with him there.
And then he figured that out. Well, then he got you to get past that, and then it was just all about the music.
Correct. It was, of course, there were always, you'd go in with a passage or whatever you'd go in for a lesson, and who knows where you're going to lead, but you'd go in asking him a question or doing his diagnosis, just play for him for a while. He'd say, do this and that, the other thing, but it was always helpful to me. It wouldn't take him very long, and you'd notice that sitting outside in the hallway waiting for your lesson for the person before you, it wouldn't take him very long. Suddenly that person was playing, they sounded just like night and day what they had sounded like when they played whatever passage it was initially. He'd get them there, but then that was really that's where he really took off. He got you to that starting point so quickly of getting beyond your problems with the instrument or making it play more efficiently and with a much better sound. Mm-hmm. Which of course that was another thing that I really worked on with him. But he could get you to that starting point so quickly, and then that's where he really took off to, in his words, trying to achieve that artistry. To be an artist, he would say, he referred to, Bud Herseth or whoever as fine artists, the people right. that you were trying to emulate. And in order to try and get to that point where you were really playing well, you get to the point where you were starting beyond your instrument. And then again, what was going on between your ears, not in front of your face. Right. You didn't recognize that at the time, again, but looking back on it, I really think that's what that was his real skill.
So I think what you're saying, to me, it seems like a lot of people, when they look back on Jake, his teaching, there's sort of this exterior, the shell, that it's all about gimmicks and gadgets. Mm-hmm. But really, it was all about the music. That was his central focus, was getting you to the point where you could be a really fine musician.
And he was, looking back again, he was a tuba player. Of course, he was a world-class tubaist, and but he wasn't a trumpet player or a 4-inch horn player. But he'd sat in the Chicago Symphony for 50 years or mm-hmm. something, listening to Adolph Herseth play, and have supporting accompanying great soloists, vocalists, and all sorts of instruments. So he had a better idea of what a great trumpet player sounded like than anybody, really, right. or other than people that had sat in that situation all those years. So, whereas I was that was the thing studying when I studied with Herseth. And I was the best lessons I had ever had with him were just going to that orchestra hall and hearing him play. You couldn't get that from Mr. Jacobs, of course, because he wasn't going to pick up a trumpet and play some passage on it.
Right.
But again, he could get you thinking about the phrasing, thinking about being very vocal and just getting beyond the instrument. But he could do that because he was so good, again, at getting beyond those instrumental problems. He could teach you how to put yourself into that situation. I'm being a little vague and roundabout here, but he'd learn whatever trick. I'm calling them tricks, but little thing that to work on would work for you to get you to that point. I implemented those things into my daily routine. Every time I warmed up, I spent 5 or 10 or 15 minutes doing. I was there with the same thing that Mr. Jacobs, simple things mm-hmm. that Mr. Jacobs had me do so many times, and that would get me to that point, and then I could start doing my job.
You use that word simple again, and I think in my own recollection, it is the simplicity. He was always looking for that point at which you could be successful.
Correct.
And to get it to a point of simplicity, and then grow from there. You peel back the layers of complexity until the point where you can be successful, and then you add one layer at a time. Was that your experience?
Correct. Yeah.
I remember him talking about speaking about he obviously didn't demonstrate trumpet literature in your lessons. But I remember him saying that he didn't play. I mean, he played the trumpet when he was younger. He was the Boy Scout bugler and et cetera, et cetera. But he understood the principles
Sure.
That were involved in brass playing, and so he didn't feel he needed to actually play the instrument, but to know the principles, the physics and the physiology, how it worked.
Sure. No, I mean, I think the physiology of playing any brass instrument is probably about the same.
Just different
higher
amounts
or lower.
Right, higher or lower, more pressure or less pressure.
Right. But and I don't know how he approached tuba players. Or again, I'm only speaking from the way he approached me. And looking back, I don't think that I had a lot of physical hang-ups or what would you say, mechanical difficulties in playing the instrument. Other than I had that that sort of a lockout. But that was more. Again, that was totally mental. And so if I had gone in with a lot of embouchure problems or whatever, lessons might have been completely different. But with me, it was more just teaching you to get to that other level of being able to be what he would call move into the artist realm, aspiring to be a fine artist and a storyteller, which I think that I'm sure he did with all his students. The idea of telling a story and not playing the instrument, not trying to get a passage out, but actually getting really like you're speaking to someone when you're playing, putting a message across. And that's is again, I haven't played in an orchestra for 10 years, but that you can kind of get into that hang up as a professional musician. You're just in there doing the job, playing the part, and when you can get back to where you're trying to speak through your instrument, tell a story, that was what it was all about with him. And I think that looking at the great players that came through there and took lessons from him and won the big jobs and kept the big jobs and have the big jobs now, that's really what set them apart. That's what they do when they play. And that was really the way I think that he tried to get all of his students to be. Everybody can't be Phil Smith or whoever. Run down the names, probably any of the great brass players of that whole generation. They came through his studio at some point and took some lessons from him, and that was the great ones. That's the way they do when they play, and the not so great ones like me, that's still the way they try to approach it when they play.
I think you do yourself an injustice.
Well,
But Ed, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. And as usual, I consult with Puddles, and Puddles reminds me that I would be remiss if I didn't present you with a very fine thank you gift.
Some of his nuts.
Genuine salted duck nuts. So thank you very much.
Oh, I thank you, Mike. I'll have some puddle nuts right now. I've worked up such an appetite sitting here talking to you. Would you like a puddle nut?
I'll take a puddle nut.
Let me pull them right off here.
Well, thank you.
Delicious.
They're so good.
They are good.
All right, thanks a lot, Ed.
You're welcome. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just sitting right here eating my puddle nuts.